Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from today. Welcome to the lounge. Today, my guest is Inara, and we first met in person at New Worlds when it was held in Austin. We've also known each other through the Spacekind community. And today, we're going to be talking about merging science and sci fi and deconstructing the space industry a little bit. There's still this illusion that you have to be an engineer or a rocket scientist or a fighter pilot in order to be in the space industry. And that's really not the case. We also want to dive into some of the divergent sections of space as well, like queer people in space, the realities of being a foster kid, and how that actually builds resilience, which is a really important quality for success, and all the non traditional paths that are now available for people both in the US and all around the world. Nara, it's great to have you here with me today.
Likewise, thank you for having me on, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just talking a little bit before we came on the show about the importance of all the emotions, the emotional spectrum, and I know that you have a really expanded view of that because you spent a lot of your time both in the U.S. and in Europe, and also you've had a very let's say varied experience with your life journey growing up in foster care. You're a trans woman, and so you have a lot of perspective that many people don't get access to. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how that's helped you to bridge the gaps between, science, sci-fi, luxury, fashion, and all these different worlds that you touch?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up in foster care, you get transferred from home to home, and there's a lot of bad things. And I know we all know all the terrible stuff that a lot of us go through, but there's a really good side of it too, and that's that you learn to expect differences and not
Mhm.
only expect it, but crave differences. So, I went through like 12 different placements, and before foster care, different homes I got transferred in and out of and kind of schlepped off on different people. But you see like different religions, different cultures, different bedtime norms and food norms and the way that people deal with marriages and conflict resolution. And
Mm,
growing up in those different environments, it unhinged any idea of what normal was, and
yeah.
it really unlocked any kind of preconception of this is how we do things, or that it has to be a way. So for me, it was a first class education in the world's wide open, and it
Hmm.
could be anything. And the one of the bad sides to all that though is this lack of continuity. So we look at the statistics for foster kids, and all of that kind of shuffling around and lack of stability leads to things like imprisonment and death and
Mm.
prostitution, and basically the worst things you can imagine. That's where the kids get dumped into. But um, there's one piece of continuity I always had, and that was moving to a new home. Every time I got shuffled off to a new home, the very first night, after all the chaos had died down, the usual, when you first check into a foster home, they
Right.
search all of your items, they make you shower, they check your hair, they take everything away from you, they give you the rules, and there's all this whole thing. It's a very, very emotional kind of thing you go through, but at the end of that night, you have a moment to breathe. So I would always go out the very first night and look up at the stars, and
Mm,
that was my sense of nothing's changed. I'm still right here where I was. And
yeah.
so that for me it was a powerful kind of connection to keep. No matter what changed, I always had those same constants. And so that's been kind of my way of making that instability work, because I've got a constant. So now it's okay to play with the instability and let things shift around and experience different and empower myself with that.
That's really beautiful, and what a great point as well that, we can have a constant to anchor us, and that helps us find that constant within ourselves as well, while still being able to play. I kind of got this image of, the anchor and the boat will move on the top of the water, right? But it's still anchored into place. It might move in a certain direction a little bit, but it can't drift too far. And so that's why it's really important that we find this anchor for ourselves, and within ourselves, right? And how we can connect to something to find the stability. Because the reality is, no matter how you grow up or where you grow up, things change, seasons change, the world changes, technology, and we grow. We were just talking about Inside Out 2, and the film characters going through puberty, right? And all those intense changes that happen. And so that's a really, really beautiful thing. I love that it was the stars for you, because really for thousands of years, that's been how people navigated, across the seas, how they explored, and that's something that can allow us to explore too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your journey in space. So you had the stars, they were your anchor, your North Star, if you will, and that was what helped you find that stability with all these changes. And as you mentioned, there's the pro and the, maybe let's say, the limit and the serve to the situations that you were in. It limited you because it created no continuity, but it really served you in that it gave you these other skill sets. So, was it because of the love of stars that you decided you wanted to explore the space industry, or did that happen in a different way?
Actually, it. I wish it was that clear, like, oh, stars, space, 1+1, but it worked out a little bit differently. I had this continuity, but then everything else was still chaos. And I grew up in a really small town, very conservative Mormon town, and
Mm.
I never really understood the bubble that I was in. Like, I understood that to be everything. I didn't understand that there was a life outside. Like, I analytically understood that there was more than my town in the world, but I
Right.
couldn't really grasp how I could connect with anything else. So in my mind, the entire limit of my world was this small town. And what
Mm.
I knew was I didn't belong there. I didn't fit with anyone there. I was an outcast. I was abused by not only my foster homes, but kids at school and even teachers. It was just, I didn't belong there. And so I thought, okay, so I turn 18, then what? Like, what do I do? Like, there's the power plant or, the grocery store. I didn't see a path forward for myself.
Yeah.
And then something crazy happened, something magical happened. I discovered these amazing things called National Geographics. And I had this habit. I would get my pocket money and I would go once a week to this thrift store run by some nuns, and they had stuffed animals for like 10 cents. That
Right.
stayed with me. And I would, this is my thing. I collected stuffed animals. I had like 300 stuffed animals, like
Oh my
rabbits
God.
and raccoons and carrots and you name it. But at one point, I loved looking for the stuff that wasn't so readily available. So I would like peek behind the curtain where they were still stocking things and be like, can I look in the box?
Yeah.
And at one point there was this box and she's like, well, I haven't gotten to it, but go ahead. And I pulled out this box and it's all these National Geographics and it's every one of them from 1960 to 1993.
Oh my
And I'd never
God.
seen something like this. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like, what have I found? It was like a treasure. And I think I forget how much. It was like 50 cents for the whole box, some
Wow.
crazy small price. And so I grabbed it and took it home and it's just, you open a National Geographic and it's just pure gold. It's like tribes and cultures and astronauts and dinosaurs. And I'm like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
Like, this is
What
what's
is all
out
this
there?
magic?
Yeah. And so I had a couple resolutions in that moment. Like when I was pouring through all these magazines, I'm just like, okay, one, I'm getting out of here because the party is much bigger elsewhere. Like there's more crazy things going
Yeah.
on. And two, what's this space thing? So that was my first big, like, oh, worlds, like
Yeah.
worlds are out there. And then I got the High Frontier. I was an interlibrary loan geek.
Ah,
We had like
yes.
10 books in our public library. So interlibrary loaned a bunch of books, and one of them ended up being the High Frontier, and that was it. Like that was my journey.
And so tell people who might not know about the high frontier what that is. I mean, we definitely know many people in our world. Earthlight Foundation has a lot of these principles and the mindset and philosophy. But for those who might be newer to space, what is the high frontier? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say without hyperbole, it's really a gateway into the possibilities of space for everybody. Jerry
Mm.
O'Neill was one of these people. He didn't come from space. He was a physicist, and he realized that we could build a future in space now. Like in his time in 1970s, that space could happen right now, and he wanted it to be for everybody. So his vision early on was so far ahead of even where we are now. He said,
Mm.
we can build cities in space. We can do it with the technology we have now, and this can be used to uplift the people who've been left behind on planet Earth. So
Mm.
he's not even thinking, let's just build elegant, extravagant cities for the powerful and wealthy. He was saying, like, all these people that aren't getting what they need, like, I think I've got it figured out for them. And
Yeah.
that's a powerful message. And the other part of that was he basically built a revolution.
Yeah.
Around his work was this entire group of people that
Jerry's
understood.
kids.
Yeah, Jerry's kids, absolutely. They understood that space could now be about more than just government space.
Right.
NASA was wonderful, but it was more like watching that shining hill in the distance and seeing how beautiful it was. And he was like,
Mm.
no, like, we can do that. Like, we can
Yeah.
be part of it. And that really started, like, private space organizations. So many beautiful ones like National Space Society are the direct descendants of that work.
That's amazing. Yeah, I got that book actually last year after New Worlds, and it's really incredible to kind of go backwards in time and read something that you can now see unfolding, right? And it's also very much in line with that Star Trek philosophy that the Roddenberry's founded, with Star Trek. Like, this is for everybody. And how do we also still advance and make it better here while we're out there exploring? And the reality is that a lot of our tools, a lot of the things we use every single day are because of the space programs, because of what we had to do to figure out how to be in space and how to, solve things like going to the bathroom in zero G, or, have nutrient dense food that doesn't take up a lot of space. So we have baby formula, we have diapers, we have these things that we're all addicted to. So it's incredible when we really look at it from that perspective, which I don't think most people get access to. Even with the internet and TV, the algorithm kind of points you to whatever you kind of click on. So unless you're being exposed, a lot of people just don't have the awareness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, and there's two parts to that I would say. Like, one is that a lot of people don't realize this, but then I do think that as an industry we fall back on that too much. I think what we're kind of on the defensive a lot with the space industry, because we do amazing things, and it seems like sometimes the more great things we do, the more the public goes extravagance. Why are you wasting your time on all these extravagant things we don't need when we have real problems down here? And I think that's a result of us having this dichotomy that we've enforced, really, of space and Earth. And we have to get to a point where people understand that there is no dichotomy here.
Right. There's no separateness.
This is one big system that's all interconnected. And I mean, to the extent that space weather, solar activity can impact our storm surges. So we have a storm coming through, Hurricane Helene right now, I think it is, right? And that is a direct result, at least partially, to the solar activity that's happening. But we don't have a solar report every day on the weather. Like, why don't we? We have satellite disruptions. Satellite disruptions can impact everything across the planet. And our daily lives are impacted by this, but then we still don't have these solar reports to say, hey, there's going to be a satellite disruption this week. And to the extent where we'll have these kind of massive disruptions across our grids, and people are like, what's going on? And no one really clues them in. So I think we have to get to a point where we separate this entire idea. And it was useful, like back in the day, it was useful to have this mythos, this golden place, this far off, kind of unachievable goal we were reaching for, and everyone dreamed together. But now it's not serving us so well. So we have to kind of remove that divide.
Right. So it's time for the ideas to evolve. And I love what you said. They're not separate. Earlier this year on Earth Day, we did Earth Space Day. And Frank White was talking about how he was present at the very first Earth Day ever, when that became a thing. And so he was really excited to be part of the first Earth Space Day and talking about how it is an integrated system, right? And it would be akin to saying that our brain and our heart are separate. They're different organisms, yes, organs, but they're in one organism, and one impacts the other, right? And it's the same thing with Earth and space. And so when we start to look at it from a systems point of view, which a lot of engineers can often understand, but many people think in silos because, look at our medical system, look at everything is separated as a function of it growing. Then all of a sudden you have departments for everything. And then people don't get the perspectives that you get when you're multidisciplinary, when you grow up in multiple environments. And what I'm also hearing from you is that there is a need for the science community to really up their game in how they communicate and how they share, and not just doing it from a very science heavy perspective that most people, one, probably don't care about, and two, don't even understand, right? How do we connect to the human story and make it exciting and fun and show why it's relevant and get the buy-in rather than, well, you just don't understand and therefore you're the problem, right? We need to come together rather than continue to think that the other side is wrong.
Absolutely. I think there's an issue with, or I won't even say issue, there's a cultural piece here. So culturally, we have a problem in our community. And I'll use a good example, the flat earthers. So flat earthers, people love to laugh at them. They love to deride them. They love to say like these idiots, that kind of thing. It's almost like it's the kids we're allowed to pick on. And it happens. It happens in every generation. Like, they're just flat earthers. Let's bully those people. I think that I love flat earthers. I adore flat earthers. I love conspiracy theorists. I love alien.
I love asking them questions.
Yeah,
and seeing how they view things.
They're just, I don't agree with any of that. It's all wrong as far as I'm concerned. But I love their passion. I love how much they want to search. I love how connected they are. So a good example is, I've run these large, over 1 million member groups on Facebook for years. And that takes a long time to build up. It takes a
Right.
lot to keep engagement flowing, but not in a flat earther group. All you have to do is basically sneeze and everyone's active. So I will go into, I make a fake name. I go into a Facebook group with a bunch of alien conspiracists or flat earthers, and I'll drop a little bit of science in, an article about, the moon landing or the Curiosity rover, and they go crazy. They love it. They can't get enough of it. They want to know more about it. And,
Yeah.
to me, it's like that's what's missing in the average science group. If I go into a group of people who know the world's a globe and they're fine with that, and I drop something in, they're like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. But if you
Right.
drop a little hint from NASA and saying, hey, it's Friday, but on Monday we've got something really big, NASA discovered something, the entire weekend I can look at the two different metrics. The alien conspiracy groups are like, oh, contact, they're going to talk about it, aliens, and they're talking and they're chatting and they're all energetic. And I go into the science groups and they're like, oh, it's probably some more water or something. Like they got to figure it out.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like there's something valuable we're missing here. And it's that
Yeah.
there's this passion that needs to be engaged. But we're so up here with our knowledge and we have it all figured out that we're not coming down. And I'm like, let's meet in the middle here. Let's come down and let's see what they care about. And, those demand signals are vital. If we don't
Absolutely.
realize as an industry that demand signals are our power source, then we're not going to get very far.
That's a great, great point because, we in this industry have a lot of walking, talking heads, intellectual, very fact heavy. Where's the wonder? Where's the curiosity? I mean, when those people were children, that's why they got into these industries, not because, they were so rigid, but because there was the joy and the curiosity and this deep desire to know more. But that in itself can also become a bit of a cage, a bit of a prison, right? And so bringing back in that initial thing, and again, that's what makes us human, right? And we can always learn from other people. It doesn't mean we have to agree with them, but we can always learn and consider the possibility that there is a different way to look at something, right? My reality is very different to your reality, and to my mom's reality, to my dog's reality. Everybody's differing in how they perceive the world based on a lot of factors. And so the more we can understand that and work with it to our advantage, the more we're going to be able to collaborate rather than just try to stamp out what we don't agree with.
Absolutely. And I think there also, we do need these high-end spaces where we're talking very, high profile, high ideals, very textbook, very clinical physics and engineering. And we do need those spaces, but then we do need people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, for instance, or Bill Nye or Beekman. We need people to come down and communicate at the level where it's like public engagement. So that's really vital too. But I'm far more interested, and those are all lovely people, but I'm more interested in like the YouTubers, the communicators out there that are like this new generation of communicators that are excited and they're at the regular human level and they're engaging with people and they're blowing things up in their homes and showing them the results of chemistry and my kids eat that stuff up. That's more of what we need. But I think the ultimate thing, and this is kind of something on my I've had like a year of kind of reflection. I realized that our ultimate goal now needs to be to destroy the space industry. We have to completely deconstruct it. It has to cease to exist. But it's like the phoenix, right? It doesn't disappear. Right. It's going to change form. So I've got some great ideas about that.
Yeah, amazing. And I think we're at a really critical time in history where we're seeing a lot of old structures failing and crumbling. But and everyone's kind of panicked about that. But at the same time, that's what we need to do to create space from which we can rebuild, right? And then let that stuff decompose, become nutrient-rich soil from which we can grow new things. And, I'm already starting to see it in some of the more progressive places. I live in Austin. But it's really important. I mean, even within ourselves, right? It's every time we go through a big pivot or a change, we need to allow ourselves to deconstruct the old beliefs, the old ways of doing things, your old habits and systems that you had, and allow there to be new things. But that deconstruction process is not always easy, doesn't happen overnight, but we build awareness around it so that as it starts to happen, we can work with it rather than against it. So what are some of the thoughts you have on that for the space industry in particular?
Yeah, I look at kind of our progression. So one thing in our favor, and I would say one thing we've done really well, is this progression from the original kind of national defense posture of we have to beat the Soviets to space, and if we can beat them to space, they know that we're superior and that we can beat them in a war. And it was this whole national defense strategy, and that whole, we created the myth, we created the gods, like these astronauts were gods. We put them in front of fancy cars and made them larger than life, and they were all rocket jockeys, and that was necessary at the time. And we not only got America dreaming together, we got the world dreaming together. Most people from that generation can tell you where they were during the moon landing. That was, that was a big touchstone moment for their generation. And they were gods. But that was great at the time. But now we're in this generation where we don't want to worship these gods anymore. We want a piece of the action. We want to be part of it, right? And I see like Jerry O'Neill and these original organizations that arose during the 70s and 80s and Planetary Society. We went from government space to these kind of organizations, getting the messaging out and engaging the public and finding ways for them to play with it, to the private space industry with like SpaceX and Axiom and Blue Origin and all these wonderful things that they're doing. But now it's time for a whole new open space, I'll call it. We have a new calling now to where I think we need to completely deconstruct the space industry. And there's two parts to that in my mind. There's one, really getting it into the hands and decentralizing it into the hands of the public, but also, taking space and putting it in other industries. So, most of what I've been doing the last few years has been connecting space to different industries. So Hollywood and music and fashion and crypto, finding these niches where we can partner and connect to those industries. But then I realized through that work that it's not enough to just have this siloed industry that creates conduits. Now we have to completely break it apart, and space has to exist in the fabric of all of those industries. So it kind of becomes invisible, this idea that Google has of the internet disappearing, for instance. If we take space and we break it apart and we give pieces to the mining industry and the energy industry, and yes, fashion and entertainment and transport, then what happens is when we talk about the great things we're doing, it's not space, this crazy nebulous elitist thing you can't connect with is doing this thing over here that you don't know really pertains to you. It's, hey, that thing you care about also has a space component. And that's the future. And I think two things. It makes it more accessible, really a couple things. It makes it more accessible. It makes it more palatable. It makes it more fundable, but also it makes it more dynamic in the sense that you're not going to criticize one crazy industry. You're going to connect with all those industries you're already connected with. So space becomes instantly plugged into everybody.
I love that. Yes, we're getting a lot of comments that people are really enjoying that concept, and it's getting out of the echo chamber, getting out of this silo where we've got the blinders on because we've got a goal. And I mean, that's a lot of people have that, right? They set a target and they just go for it. And then they get there and maybe there's collateral damage, or they miss the opportunity to make it better because they were just so focused on that thing. And then they get there and they're like, oh, wait, it doesn't work, or I don't even like it. Or, so there's a lot of parallels there just for daily life too, not just for the space industry. And that kind of concept can also apply for other industries as well. How do we consider the other stakeholders in this complex system that we are part of as being humans, as being part of this whole ecosystem on the planet? It's really powerful. And I think that can be adopted in many ways.
Absolutely. I like to say that culture building, eat strategy for breakfast every day of the week. And I think that's where we've fallen into the strategy loophole. And I think Sandra's right. We have to get out of the echo chamber. We need to culture build. And for that, we have to start with the premise that a human civilization in space is real, and that civilization is robust and it needs the infrastructure. So I look at work like Foundation for the Future, for instance, building the Space Act. They're looking at the very real need of, okay, well, you want to do all these things in space, but you need infrastructure for that. Like, where is the plan, the broad scheme for infrastructure? And so they're trying to get the Space Act passed. They've been doing a lot of amazing work on Capitol Hill for that. And that Space Act would establish, by congressional mandate, an organization to build that infrastructure. And it would be, public-private partnership. So it would be, basically risk would be bought down by the government and then investors could come in on the top. But that infrastructure would be for the entire plethora of industries that want to play in space. So measures like this, to me, are really how we do that deconstruction in a responsible way. We build those foundations and then we say, okay, everyone come play with us. And I think, that's hard to pitch to all my lovely, amazing people that I dearly care about. All of you out there panicking in the space industry. I love all of you. I love our industry, but it's time to break it apart. It's time to let it blossom, or break the egg open, let it hatch and let it live. So we have to be willing to kind of get out of our bubble, get out of our little club, and go out into the world and become real with everybody else, you know?
I love that. Yes, because when we can become real for everybody else, that's when things are really going to accelerate, right? If it's a pipe dream, if it's not tangible, if it's just out of reach, that's when people disengage. That's when they fight back and they just go, "Oh, well, this doesn't work for me." So making sure that we have the voices, like the influencers you mentioned, Tim Dodd, Everyday Astronaut, he's a great example of that, right? And I mean, I had a friend the other day who's not in the space industry whatsoever. And, they were talking and they're like, I just met them, right? And they're like, "Oh, you're in space? I know Tim Dodd, Everyday Astronaut. He's so cool." And I was like, see, that's what we need. We need someone that's completely removed from the space industry, has no idea about it. If you say space, they think the moon and NASA and that's it, or the, James Webb telescope. But when you can have them now start to quote names, that's when you're piercing that veil, and then the illusions go away, right? Then we can start to have real conversations about what we can do together. Because ultimately, I mean, why should real people care about space? If we have a satellite problem, like the Kessler syndrome happen, guess what? We're going to go backwards. There won't be any more internet or phones or GPS, and we're going to have to relearn things a really hard way, and we're not going to be able to even leave this planet potentially. So for those of you who don't know, the Kessler syndrome is, where, debris starts to run into each other and traveling at 17,500 miles up there per hour. So even a tiny little paint chip can blow a hole into a satellite really big. But if it just everything starts crashing into each other, now it's literally Wall-E, that movie, right? Where the earth has all this junk around it and we can't get through anymore. And so that's why we really need to make these connections. It's time to, come back down to planet Earth, if you will, and be human so that we can then go together.
Absolutely. I love Loretta Whiteside talks about this concept of, we can't, because a lot of us in this industry, we kind of drank the Kool-Aid on the idea of we'll go to space and we'll be these amazing people because space will change all of us. And
right.
Loretta was really pivotal for me as a SpaceCon student and, someone who really looks up to her for her ideas of you can't just expect space to fix you. You've got to be dedicated to being the best you can be so that when you go out there, we do it better. And the idea of being conscious of, let's be conscious of how this next progression happens, because throughout time, we've expanded as a species or as groups within the species, and we damage other people, we damage other systems because we're not thinking about the consequences. We're just going, ooh, right. New thing, ooh, right. Resources. And so it's been this chaotic kind of, like it's the Kessler syndrome for humans, right? We're all crashing into each other, yes. into world events. And so Loretta's really big about be conscious, think about what I do, how it impacts other people and other systems. And that's easy to forget if we're a bubble and we're all like, yeah, space, yeah, settlement, right. Let's just do it. But then if you've got 1,000 other industries tapping you on the shoulder and going, what happens if this, or what happens if that? Then we have to stop and think about how we go out. And I think that's really important, is we go together. And because we go together, we've got to be orderly about it and thoughtful of it.
Right. If you want to go far, you go together. If you want to go there quickly, you go alone. But what's the point in going quickly, right? And we have a survival instinct. So we want to propagate and make sure that there's, a healthy place for our planets. And what really struck me, I remember when I first met Loretta, and when you go to SpaceKind.org and you watch the video that she created, it's so powerful. And I still get teary every single time, but it's like, yeah, you can want to go to space, but you still have to like yourself when you get there. And that really hit me, because it was like my whole life was this high achieving, like, let me do the thing. Let me show how awesome and smart and whatever else quality insert here I am. But then you'd get there and it'd be this hollow thing, because it was just like a dopamine hit, adrenaline rush. And it's like, well, now I got to go for the next thing. And so if we're not able to be conscious, then we're going to have misunderstandings. We're going to have, fights. We're going to have the same pick the flower mentality instead of grow the garden mentality. And so it's really, really powerful work. And I love that she's bringing people together that are more traditionally in the intellectual space, and then giving us access back to the humanness and like and building that and facing our dark sides, and facing the shadow and going on this hero's journey together so that we can come out better and be crew members, right? Because if you're a crew member, you're really thinking about the other person because you have a shared goal. It's also part of survival. And that's why Trader Joe's has a lot of success. They call their team crew members, and that they treat everybody in that manner. And they're studied all the time about getting people to work together and good leadership and things like that. But imagine we have that mentality just here on Earth, right? Not just in a spaceship or in an aircraft.
Well, and I think if we're conscious of the fact that our beginning is our end, in the sense of June says, every revolution carries within the seeds of its own destruction.
Yeah.
Being aware that, when you plant the seed, you're planting the death of that seed. You're planting the end of that system. So when we go out into space, as we grow, as we create, we've already planned our own destruction. We've already planned how that civilization collapses, whether we realize it or not. So we have to plan for that collapse. A really good positive way to think about that is satellites. When we send a satellite up, we're sending something up that has an end planned for it. And whether we planned it very consciously and we know exactly how we're going to deorbit it, reuse the metal, whatever we're going to do, or we went, hey, look, satellite. Oh, wait, what happened?
Right.
We've set the end in course. We've set its end in motion. And so we're responsible for that. So whenever we create, we should know that we're responsible for the end that we've put inside it, that we've embedded within that system. So with that in mind, I think what happens is we plan too often thinking this will always last. Who cares about the end, because the story never goes anywhere, it never ends, just keeps it going on. So we have to be conscious of kind of that industry mortality. Every organization ends, every movement ends, every revolution ends. So what's next? And if we haven't built in a strategy for those next phases, then we're doing it wrong. I think that's where, again, the consciousness comes in.
That's so powerful. And I also am hearing echoes of, just for how humanity has evolved its consciousness. It's only really recently that it's been more okay and not a morbid thing to talk about death and to plan and to be curious about it and to understand that that's just a part of what happens, right? We are born and then we die, and who knows what that next leg of the journey is. And so if we ignore it and pretend like it's never going to happen, then it's this real big shock and cognitive dissonance and a lot of other things. But if we accept that that's part of it, then we can live much more rich and full lives because we know that tomorrow is not guaranteed, right? And so it's interesting to even go just by generation by generation, decade by decade, and see how, as more topics become less taboo and more accepted, and how we've kind of evolved our consciousness as a species, and then how that shifts how we show up at work and what we do. And like you said, planning for that next phase. What We Owe the Future is a great book I like to recommend to people. Have you read this one yet?
I haven't, actually. Let me see.
It's really great. William MacAskill, I think, is the youngest philosopher at Oxford University. He wrote this book. And, we hear a lot about, like Mariba talks a lot about the 7 generations, right? And that's a lot of indigenous wisdom is, okay, we're going to do this now. How is that impacting 7 generations later? And Western society is in some places starting to kind of catch up to the fact that this is important. We have to think about it because otherwise we have big problems to, excuse my French, unfuck, right? Just like we do now. And I remember picking up this book and going I intellectually understand this concept, but how is this really going to impact me? Will I actually care more or be inspired to be different and think about the long-term effects of this decision? And it really did. Even with that kind of consciousness or conscious awareness going in, reading the book, I still felt that resistance within me. I know I should do this, but does it really make a big impact? And this book, I'm still thinking about it over a year later. And I actually want to read it again just because it's been, I think I rented it from the library around this time last year. And I just want to revisit the material because it's something to really noodle on. It's not like, I've read this concept once, I'm done. This is really something that I think we all want to consider. And he presents the idea that what you do in your life today, what your organization does today, is not for you. It is for the future and the future descendants. And why does that matter? And he just proposes the argument in such a way that I'd never heard before or been exposed to. And I think it's really something that everyone should at least consider, right? Doesn't, again, mean that you're going to adopt it, but it's something to consider. And if more people are considering this possibility, who knows where the conversation will go.
Absolutely. I was a Gaelic teacher and student and
Yeah.
enthusiast when I was younger. And there's this concept, in Gaelic, there's no real possession. You can say like my spouse, my children, my body parts, but everything else is just something you're using. So you would never say my pen, for instance, or my car. Those things don't exist in Gaelic or in Gaelic. You'd say that, the car that I'm using or the car that I have. And that notion of really nothing's ours. Like it's all just, in Germany, they'll say, close your eyes and you'll see what belongs to you. I love that. It's all
love
just,
that.
it's on loan, and our lives are really on loan. And it's one of the things I built into the Multiplanetary Society from day one. Like the first day, our first initial meeting, it was like, how will we close the organization down? And so when I built the Multiplanetary Society, it was really important to me that it not just be another nonprofit that either fails or succeeds, but if it succeeds, it goes on forever. And I'd watched over the years working with nonprofits, I'd seen a lot of great and terrible things, but one of the things that really stuck with me was this problem of drift, where the first couple of years you have this passionate group of people that are very focused and they have this goal to change the world, and then by like year 3 it falls into selling t-shirts and going to conferences and putting on conferences, and like this endless cycle of let's keep the lights on, let's stay relevant, and let's keep the talks going. And they've lost track of that, like, let's change the world moment, because they just went on too long. And it can be that way for people, for systems. Like too much life can be worse than, anything else. Like death is not the worst thing. Like it can be much worse if you outlive this moment or this thing you're here for. And so we built into Multiplanetary Society 2035. Like in 2035, we shut down. The organization's done. Whether we succeeded or whether we failed, it's disbanded. If we've built anything, it gets distributed across whoever needs to take it, whatever public entities need to take that on. But we're done. And the leadership dissolves and we don't take on a new name with it. Like it's just done. And it was a really hard sell when I first started talking about this new thing I was building with all my kind of peers. They were like, oh my God, I would describe it in detail. And oh, this is great. Oh, this is going to change the world. Oh my gosh, I would love to help you. It was whether I was asking them to be on an advisory board or help me build this, or, hey, I need structures. But then I would get to that end part and they would say, no, I think you missed the mark there. Like, so you build this great thing. I'm like, yeah. And it changes the world. Yeah. And then you destroy it. I don't think, and I had one of my advisors, he's like one of the key people I turned to keep me on track for finances and structures. And he was like, Inara, I'm with you on everything else. I beg you to change that last bit though. Like you can't do that. That's a legacy. Why would you deconstruct it? And for me, it was just important to show the possibilities of being mission oriented to the point that the mission really was the goal. And you have a deadline and you either meet it or you don't, but then you move on to the next thing.
I love that you just brought that up, because very often with missions, there is a goal for an idea or a result, whatever it is. But because there's no deadline, it's so easy to get lost in the minutia or the noise or get swayed into this or that. And then you wake up and like some of these foundations you look at, and it's like, how did you started from here and all of a sudden you're involved in a scandal that directly opposes exactly what you're like preaching about. And so it's by doing that. I mean, the reason why I read that book was because I rented it from the library and I had a due date. I had to give it back. And so it meant that I read it instead of it just sitting on my shelf. All these books behind me, I read probably like 40%, if I'm honest. I love books also. Like I just want to be surrounded by them. But I see a topic and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get that. But I buy them faster than I can read them. Right. And so it's important to have those deadlines so that you can actually get there.
For sure. I mean, we need that pressure, but we also need the expectation of this has to be delivered. This has to be done. Otherwise, can you imagine meeting your friends that way? Like, let's meet on Thursday. Great, let's meet on Thursday. There's no time set. We just figure out and it happens organic. No, it'll never work. It's a mess.
I mean, that's kind of how a lot of my male friends I mean, it's really interesting to me. I'll be like, what are you doing today? Oh, meeting up with the boys. When? I don't know. Where? I don't know. I'm waiting for a message. I'm like, what? Yeah. How do you live life this way?
Yeah, no, I've got to have a schedule. I think it's important. Deadlines are so important.
Yeah, and someone actually, so Kevin has commented, wondering how you balance the competitive nature that advances things with the crew mentality, like we described for Trader Joe's, or, when you're when you're going to be in a metal tube strapped to a rocket for a period of
You said
time.
Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin Pope.
Brilliant. Kevin, whoever you are, thank you. I love this question, because to me, that's such a pivotal point of what needs to happen and what is happening, thankfully. In traditional models, the capital market, I love capitalism. I love the competitiveness. I love the fact that competition makes us do greater things. And in the traditional world, in the market on Earth, you can slit your opponent's throat and you prosper, because now you've got more, you've cornered another niche of the market, you can build a wider moat. All that stuff is wonderful. The problem is that you can't do that in space, because nothing exists there yet. So if we're on the ground, like, this is the other thing too, is like, besides deconstructing space from the sense of redistributing it, we should deconstruct it by being honest with everyone and saying, guess what? We don't actually exist. There is no space industry. So it does not exist. There's no industry in space. All of us are part of a terrestrial industry with a space focus. And so that's the first part to realize, is that if we slit each other's, and the funny thing is we know it. Like, when I say that, a lot of my spacer friends will be like, oh, don't say things like that. It's hard enough to tell people, to make people care about us. But they know it in the sense that we keep acting terrestrially. So we're this, we're aspiring to be a space industry. We have no infrastructure in space. So, everything from roads to railroads to shipment to trash to anything you can imagine that is an integral energy, anything we need to function. Let's just say we want to put a Circle K, my American friends. We want to put a Circle K in space. The millions of things that would have to happen just for that convenience store to happen in space don't exist. So if I slit my opponent's throat here on Earth in the space world, maybe they were the ones that were going to supply my oxygen or my radiation shielding or my water storage or any of the other things I need to function in space, is the simplest things. So we do have to operate a little bit differently, Kevin. So we do need to understand that competition is how business thrives, but we need to have a basic agreement, which hasn't happened yet, by the way. We're working on that, and I'm trying to get that out there. A basic agreement of, this is our baseline of how we all work together. So I call it Myriad. That's my name for it. Operation Myriad, if you want to get fancy. Okay. The idea of Myriad is that we recognize the fact that we're a constellation of organizations and companies and industries that have to make some basic agreements. And we've seen this actually in the traditional market. So light bulbs are a good example. If you research, when light bulbs first came around, there were like 4 or 5 companies, and they got together and they're like, okay, look, we can just go crazy on this and best one wins and good luck and the chaos will unfold. Or what if we make an agreement that, because, basically you could make a light bulb that never would go out. But they were like, okay, if we do this, our company lasts 3 years. What if instead we all agree that light bulbs will last a certain amount of time and they'll break, or the filaments won't work anymore, or there's certain, we'll keep the energy low. We all agree to this, and then we can all prosper long term, but we can still be cutthroat everywhere else. And it worked. Like, they did this, and they all submitted inspectors to each other. So, GE would go over to Edison. I don't know, I'm making things up, but you look it up. They would send their inspectors over to rival companies, and they would have to let them in, and they would make sure that the light bulbs weren't lasting too long. And now they've built an empire out of those companies. We can do the same thing in space. We can have some basic agreements on, we have to make sure we all thrive to a certain level, and we have to intercooperate to build this infrastructure. But here's where we can be a little rough with each other. And so that needs to be built.
Someone just said Operation Light Bulb.
Oh, yeah. Beth, you have my heart. Beth is one of my most amazing heroes out there. She's just phenomenal. I aspire to be like her.
Well, it sounds like I need to meet Beth. Beth, please connect with me, because anyone that gets that glowing recommendation, I would love to know. And anyone who's watching this, if we're not already connected, feel free to shoot me a message. We want people to be here live. We want people to be engaging with us. This is how we pierce the veil. This is how we have that constellation, because conversations are happening. And that's what I love about having guests on from such different backgrounds, because they see a previous episode, and then they that gets woven into what we talk about. And, some people are the terrestrially based space focused people, and some people are focusing on different areas. And it's really wonderful to get all these different perspectives. And I love that you just brought that up about how it was mutually agreed upon to have this device that is not a forever thing, but it has this shelf life, right? And that's what you were talking about earlier, is understanding that what you're building has a shelf life. Even companies that have been around for a long time they evolve because they know, hey, this product or this focus, this need that we're serving in society has a shelf life. And so how do we change based on what is needed, and how do we maybe even cannibalize our own products or ideas so that we stay relevant? The ones who don't, right, like the rail companies that were not focused on transportation, they were only focused on rail, well, they didn't survive. Whereas companies who expanded their focus, and I just saw, it was one of those, oh gosh, I don't remember the name now, but it was one of those like fast moving goods snack companies, and they changed their name for their qualification. Like what they used to call themselves was like a soda company maybe, and now they're a beverage and snacks company because they've expanded their range to include a lot more products, so they don't want to be thought of as just the one thing. Anyone who's watching, if you know what I'm talking about, it was like a recent thing that I read in a headline. But anyways, it's just that focus of, hey, we're changing now. It's time to go to the next phase of life, just like when we're preteens, teenagers, young adolescents, adults, right? There's different things we focus on, and our identities completely get deconstructed and put back together, right? We weave, it's like we unravel the tapestry, like we pull on this thread because we're like, this is like old or it's frayed, and I'm gonna just see what happens. And you pull on it, and it's like, oh shit, now I just have string. But you get to weave it back in a new way. And so you'll maybe put new things in there or make a completely different design. And yet those old pieces can still be part of it. It's not like they completely go away.
Like basically you keep focused, but you have all these possibilities. I talk about it as the Who problem, the Whoville problem. If you ever read Dr. Seuss's Whoville, it's like Who pudding and Who hash. You just basically add Who to the beginning of anything. And we do that with space all the time. It's like when I was building a website fairly recently, it was going to be .space. One of my friends was like, okay, we get it. Space, and you love space, and space is everywhere, and it's great, but .space, like, can you get more refined? Like, it doesn't have to be just space, everything. Right. Amazon did what we need to do. And that's it. The other problem, too, is that we've branded our industry as space, and then we have all these other things that have to get done. And so really, it's like, is it really the biggest thing that we're doing? And I think that's where the public is lost, because they're like, well, what else you got? And I think that's where we can be more dynamic. We can have that focus, but we can broaden it. Amazon's a good example. Amazon was there originally, and they wanted to make every book available. That was their thing. And now you can't really pin down what one thing Amazon's doing. It's doing it all. And it was basically that idea that I'm going to start with a focus, but I'm going to leave it open enough, not only in the name, but in the branding and the business plan and the, every level that he was building, he had the forethought to realize, like, I want to build something expansive. So we need the same idea. We need to understand that right now it's a powerful thing. We send somebody up in a 3-minute ride to space, we can argue whether it's space or not, but, we send somebody up and they get to float around and they come down and their life has changed and people are excited, but it won't be long before someone's like, and, okay, you went to space, and then it'll be the moon, and like, okay, you went to the moon. Can you imagine if I told you, I just got back from New York, I went to New York, and you're like, oh, great, what'd you do? And I'm like, I went to New York.
Like a medal, right?
Right? So we need to be thinking about the fact that space won't be a big deal for much longer. Like what we do there will be, and that's what's going to be important.
Yes, I love that you said that. I was just talking with some friends a couple weeks ago, and even just the other day, it's like even our kids or our grandkids, it'll be like, you mean you had to get on an airplane to go somewhere and you had to sit on it for 17 hours? What? Because who knows how we're going to travel, right? Maybe it's you go up and you come back down and it takes an hour to get anywhere. Who knows? Maybe we'll have the particle thing from Star Trek. What's that called? Where you just like,
oh yeah, transporter. I vote transporter as someone who is tired of 14-hour flights.
Yeah, I mean, I love aviation. I that's my background as well. And but it's almost like when you fly, it'll be like a nostalgic, like you drive a '69 Mustang. You're like, oh, you went on a flight? That's so vintage. That's so retro, right? Rather than that being like the thing that we do. I mean, imagine somebody came to you and was like, I rode in a car today. You'd be like, okay. Like if it's your grandma, maybe. My grandma went to a church in a horse and buggy, she was telling me, as a little girl in Poland. And it's like, wow, like think about what the changes that they went through. Like my auntie's 94. And it's just incredible that's going to be us one day. And yeah, it won't be a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's why we need that substance filled, and we need that
Mm.
interconnected with other industries for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where innovation happens, right? Being that I think you and I are very similar in that we have many interests and we allow ourselves to explore those, but that's what allows us to bring things together like this because something that's done in Hollywood, the scientists and the engineers over here would never consider that. But all of a sudden that becomes the thing that helps them create or get the voice, for example, right? Or all the systems and process over here, a little bit less on the arty side, but that's going to help it actually grow into something sustainable or become a reality, right? So you get to learn from all these different perspectives. And so putting yourself in new situations, traveling, on the job training, just bringing back that curiosity, right? When I was watching this little kid in the airport the other day and they're just asking all of these questions. And then, every parent that has a 2-year-old, the why, right? And we kind of stamp that out because we're tired, we're exhausted, but we want to be asking why. Keep asking that question. And I think that we'll see a lot more collaboration happen.
Yeah, something I used to say to my kids was, and I still do, is, this is my wish for them, is may you always have more questions than answers, but may you have plenty of answers. We need
Mm,
more questions constantly. We need new adventures. I used to think that the oldest love story was Gilgamesh and the Wild Man. I thought this was the quintessential first real primal love story or romance. And then I realized through my work, with sci-fi and science, that it was actually sci-fi and science. That from the very beginning, it was these two in this deep, intimate relationship and interconnectedness. It was a living circuit. I like to say
mm.
that the very first sci-fi happened when this primitive person went out and looked up at the stars and went, "What is that?" And they were just mesmerized.
Yeah.
And they go into the cave and they're doodling and they're trying to figure out like what is going on, and they have their stories and their ideas about what this is, and then someone else comes along and sees those stories and gets really inspired by it, and they're like, let's base things on this, like let's create calendars and cultures and religions, and I've got these ideas. And then then the spark of like Prometheus's flame, basically, right? It just catches
Mhm.
fire and society starts emerging. And I look at that, that's this primal idea, but then we look at sci-fi and science now. It's the same exact relationship of Gene Roddenberry's like, wow, look, what if? And then scientists
Yeah.
go, oh yeah, like what if? And then they start building it. And it's
Yes.
beautiful to see that constantly reinforcing of the dreamers come along and they dream the possibilities, and the doers are like, I can actually make that and we can do
Yes.
more. And they move each other forward. And we're just in this constant living spark, cycling with each other. I think that's the most beautiful love story that is still going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need both, right? Not everybody can be a dreamer. Not everyone can be a doer. You know, um, I was just talking about one of my favorite books ever is Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson. Fantastic read. If you're ever wondering about why humans do what they do, including yourself, go read that book. It's going to change your life.
It's been on my
Um,
list.
yeah, it's fantastic. And he writes it in such a humorous way that even when you're reading about yourself and you've self-identified, oh yeah, I'm a red or I'm a blue or whatever, and they're maybe now talking about the less than desirable qualities or the ones you should work on, you're kind of chuckling, going, "Yeah, I do that," like haha, instead of like getting defensive. So it's just written in a wonderful way. But he talks about 80% of the population is green. They don't like change, very systematic, it's a little slower to move. But guess what? If we didn't have that, when the doers enacted what the dreamers have come up with, it would never happen because the dreamers would just keep going on to the next dream, and the doers don't see things through all the way to sustain like the end. The doers are usually the spark, the initiative, like let's get this done now, and then they follow the dreamers, and then you need the everyone behind to like get it to critical mass. So it's important that we have both. Also,
Absolutely.
Kevin, thank you. He found it. It's Campbell's Soup is dropping soup. That's
Oh,
what it was. That's what I was talking about.
the world has changed in a remarkable way now.
Yes. Now that was like if you take nothing else from this podcast, just remember how Campbell's Soup dropped soup from its name after 155 years. So doesn't matter how long you hold on to an idea or a belief or a way of being, you can always change it. I
So
think
I'm going
that's
to
a
read
mic
you something really quick. For me, the big thing was Kodak. When I was a kid, I had this 35 millimeter camera. I loved photography. I got in the woods to take my pictures, and we had to drive like 200 miles literally to go to the nearest city. So it was like
Wow.
once every few months we do the big shop. And when we went, my favorite thing was developing the film. I get
Mm,
my photos, and So
in
when
the dark
Kodak,
room.
I thought Kodak was going to disappear. I'm like, oh, and then they pivoted, and now they're like this technological company. It's like not a
Yeah,
photography thing. They
right.
were able to transition, and that was remarkable to me.
Yes. And like I'm literally about to buy a 35 millimeter camera again because I love the photos that come from. Also, you know what it is? It's you snap the picture and then the camera goes away. You're not like, oh, let me edit. Does it good? What's the angle? You live in the moment. You take the picture, and then there's something kind of nostalgic because also when you're watching something, you pull out a camera rather than a phone, you're more in the moment because you're only focused on capturing what's happening rather than seeing a notification and then getting kind of distracted. So I feel like not only is what you capture more nostalgic and poignant, but you're still present and experiencing it rather than getting pulled out of the experience. And for those of you who still want to use your phone, there's a great app called Lapse. Unfortunately, right now it's only on iPhone, but it does the same thing. Your photos develop, so you can't look at them right away, and they develop maybe in 5 minutes or 5 hours or tomorrow. And I love it. It's great. I think everyone should try it.
Yeah, my 17-year-old just got her first like camera, because she's
Yeah.
got all the tech and all the digital stuff, and she just got a Polaroid camera, and she was just so excited because she went to the mall, and I got off work, and she came home, and she's like, look what I got. You take a photo, and like it comes out, and you have to record it, and I'm gonna give them to my friends. And so it was just amazing to watch her like discover this ancient art.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, as a child, for me, it was just when we didn't have cell phones. Like I grew up in the White Mountains. We didn't have, like, there was dirt floors in half my homes. We had solar power at best. No electricity, no computers. There were no cell phones. We got like one satellite phone when I was like 17. It was this big, and it was $18 a second or some crazy amount of money for emergency calls. But whenever I discovered like 23, 24 computers in the tech world, and then digital stuff started happening, I'm like, I live in the magical alien world I dreamed of. And now for her to be so mesmerized by this Polaroid
Yeah.
camera, it's just like, full circle.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, and I have vinyls. I love playing vinyls. And my dad was like, man, I had like a whole room full of them, but I got rid of them. It's just things come in cycles and then we can get new appreciation. So that's really cool.
For sure.
All right. Now, Inara, I have a couple questions I like to ask all my guests. And the first one is I think I might have an idea of what you might say, but I want to hear in your own words. What do you think your superpower is? And if you have multiple, what do you think those things are that you consider super?
I love that you call them superpowers. For me, it's more just, this beautiful companionship I have with puzzles. It's always
Mm,
about putting the puzzle together since I was little. And I think that is the result directly of my foster care environment. Like I talked
mhm.
about, being in these different homes, different cultures. I mean, I had Baha'i foster parents, Muslim foster parents, Mormon, atheist, these different worlds they were part of. And I had to understand how the pieces connected. And
Yeah.
it was survival, it was a survival thing. And so
Mhm.
throughout my life, that's what I do. I connect the dots and the pieces. And oftentimes, for me, it's a superpower in the sense that I'll be in a room with amazing people. I'm always so blessed to be in rooms with amazing people that, when I was younger, I thought I don't belong here. And now I'm just like,
Right.
oh, I'm so excited. And I'll see these two people or these two companies, and I'll realize, oh, you need each other.
Yeah.
And for me, it's as simple as like, they're saying, hey, I need this thing. And this person's like, hey, I need someone that needs this thing. And I'm like, meet each other. I love that moment of just connecting people and watching them go, oh, yes, and it interlocks, and then something beautiful emerges. And then they go off in all these different directions and new things are born. But also, it's connecting moments as well, like
Mm.
making these moments interconnect. And that's what I see with space is like, that's what I want to bring. And that's what I hope I bring whenever I do anything with space is, hey, space, meet fashion, or hey, fashion, meet the scientists, or hey, spacers, you need this thing. I just love connecting the puzzle. And for me, if I was a billionaire tomorrow, I would still be doing this. I would still be
Yeah.
interconnecting these pieces because nothing is more beautiful than a puzzle that's coming together.
Mm.
Never complete it.
Yeah.
Never complete it because I can't do it. I don't want to just ever stop.
But you bring them
Puzzle
together.
the puzzle just grows.
I love that. And I love hearing that in your words because that's something that I like to do as well. I often describe like why do I like doing the interviews or why do I like moderating or being an MC a lot? It's because it's a puzzle. How do I get you as my guest to light up and talk about things that you're passionate about, but in a way that will be relevant for the audience that we're in front of, and where we're going to have fun, right? And so I love that how you describe that, and the fact that you said It's not about completing the puzzle. It's about bringing it close enough that the like magnets draw it into each other, right? This natural attraction occurs because that's how we can then move on to the next thing rather than like getting rigidly stuck in, oh, I must complete this thing.
Right.
A lot of people have shame or feel guilty. Like I used to think like, oh, there's a lot of projects I start and things that I begin, but then I don't finish them. And I, kind of had this narrative like that was a bad thing. And it wouldn't be that I didn't finish all things, but a lot of things would be kind of like, oh, I'd start it and then move on to the next and maybe not give it enough time to get the critical mass. But then I realized one of my superpowers is starting the thing and then going to the next thing to start it and then bringing the right people in so that that puzzle can self-complete. And so that's, I think, important for people to realize too. You don't always have to do all the steps, right?
For sure. I think, there's the importance of completing work that you start,
Yeah.
completing missions that you begin, but then the puzzle, the real secret is that you realize the puzzle is never done. Right? And that's the thing, is that we don't get to finish this generation that we start. Like we get to give what we can, and then it goes on without us. Like it's bigger. And that's the greatest thing, to be a part of something greater than ourselves and to know that it will go on even after we don't. That's powerful. And knowing that our smallness is our greatness. And we're tiny little specks in this universe, and that's why we're so massive, right?
Yeah.
We're so massive because we play these pivotal roles in this huge endlessness. And I love that moment of like instantly huge and small, vast and tiny at the same time.
Both.
So the puzzle will outlive us. How great
Yes.
that we get to tap into it for the time we can.
Absolutely. And that you don't have to do it by yourself, because that's overwhelming. And that's why a lot of people stop, because they think, oh, I need to do all these things. I need to do this whole 1,000-piece puzzle by myself, like tomorrow in 1 hour. No, right? You get to enlist other people to help you. And then that's what makes it bigger than you, and awe is an important part of that. And I think space inspires a lot of awe, but it's about finding that thing for you that allows you to tap into. That's why nature is so powerful too. We go out and see these big mountains or the aurora borealis or the stars, and we realize like, whoa, there's a lot going on, not just my own little tiny problem. And you mentioned just before we went live about Jim Carrey, right? And how the anxiety and depression is because we're not focusing on that bigger piece. We're just focusing on the tiny thing. And I saw something yesterday that said anxiety is really made up. And when things really matter, you don't get anxiety about it. Like life and death situations, no one's sitting there anxious, like, oh my God, what do I do? You just act because you have to, right? But when we're having anxiety about something, it's because it's really this kind of made up thing in our own heads. And so there's ways to work around that rather than, living in it forever.
Absolutely. I love what Jim Carrey talks about. And he's just, to be honest, I'm not into his movies. I never was. He's a beautiful, wonderful guy. He's a talented actor, but I was never into his films. I'm really into his like coming to terms with himself and seeing like his ideas of what a person is, what personality is, who we are with other people, the masks that really become us. And he talks about depression and anxiety in the sense that depression is deep rest. Like you need to rest from all the fake. You need to rest from who you've been pretending to be. And when we're depressed and anxious, it's because we've had to be someone we're not. So for so long, the mind is just like, I'm done with this. Like, can we please stop this? Like, let's just be ourselves. And for me, that's such a powerful idea. I like to pretend though that I'm an alien on this planet. So whenever I used to get imposter syndrome. Yeah. I would say used to. We all still have it. I like to say if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're not in the right room. You should be doing things so big you feel out of place at all times. But the way I coped with it was I had this little mental gymnastics in my brain of, okay, I'm an alien stranded on a planet. Everything's new and crazy, and I don't belong anywhere. But I got to figure out how to make all this work and get humans to space so I can get a ride home just so I can go have my tea, And so I approach everything with that of like, I'm just a visitor here. What can I do to make sure the road gets built so I can get back to my house? That kind of idea. And then it's play. You get to play with it a little bit. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, I don't have a degree because I come at this from a very untraditional approach. Like, I was someone who built groups. I built social networks, and I was able to use that to tap into the space industry. And now I'm sitting across from generals and Harvard graduates and CIA agents and CEOs. And, at first it was like, oh my gosh, they're going to kick me out any second. And then it became like, no, this is my game. Like, this is fun. Like, let's build something together. And I think you have to approach things with that sense of play. Otherwise, it just gets too heavy,
Absolutely. Play is so, so important. And it's not just for kids, it's also for adults. We need to give ourselves that permission to play again. And it's something that I still have to do. I literally write myself a permission slip sometimes, and it works. I'm scheduled in my calendar, have a meeting with myself, and it helps me remember why I'm doing things. So for those of you that are not playing, this is your permission slip to go play more. Um, Amazing. So I love that how you offered the perspective on the superpowers and what's so innate for you and how you cultivate that. Now, sometimes we face things in life that are a little more difficult, or we feel like maybe we're too close to the problem, or we feel like we don't know the answer because maybe we're stuck up here and we're not listening to what our heart or our intuition is telling us. So when that happens, I like to say we go to our personal board of directors, those people in our life that help shape us, who influence us, who give us their perspectives, and we consult with them before we make a decision. Now, when I ask this question of my guests, who's on your personal board of directors, I always like to say it doesn't have to be someone that's real. It could be a fictional character. It could be someone from the past, someone you haven't actually met yet, or someone in your circle. But what's really happening is you're adopting their lens on life, their philosophy, for you to put the experience through and come up with some possible solutions. So who are those people for you? Do you have some that come top of mind?
Absolutely. But before I dive too much in this, I love that you say, it can be somebody imaginary. That's powerful because it's something I tapped into as a teenager. I was a queer kid in a very conservative town in foster care, and I was closeted for my own safety and my own, survival, really. And I read this book. I got a hold of this book. I don't know how this book ended up in my town because that was very much an active, like, let's check all the books and keep all the bad stuff out kind of town.
Right. Right.
Edward Morgan Forster, he wrote a book called Maurice, or Morris, and it was published after his death. It was always scheduled to come out after his death. So spelled like Maurice in America, said like Morris in Britain. And
Okay.
I think it came out in 71. But he was a closeted homosexual in a time in Britain when it was illegal. And he wrote this semi-autobiographical book. And reading it as a child, C.S. Lewis says we read to know we're not alone. I read that book and I suddenly wasn't alone. I was
Mm.
suddenly not some freak or some evil creature that, because I always thought I was going to go to hell. Something's wrong with me. How can I fix this? And I read Morris and I realized there's nothing wrong with me. There are other
Mm.
people out there like me. And it was just reading his pain and his passion and his journey. And, he wrote a beautiful ending for himself that he didn't get, unfortunately.
Mm.
So, that was the other heartbreak in it. But I
And how do you
connected
spell
so
that?
much. What's that?
How do you spell that name?
Maurice.
Okay. And the name of the book?
That's the name of the book. Yeah, Maurice or
Oh,
Morris.
book.
And the
Okay.
author is Edward Morgan Forster, or E.M. Forster,
M.
as he was
Forster.
known.
Perfect. Yeah. I want to just share that with everyone. Sounds like a
But
book that we can all benefit from.
yeah, so I got a hold of it, and it just touched me so much that I felt this powerful connection with the author. Anyway, this is someone who's dead, who lived in another country. I had no connection to, really, but I felt so deeply connected to him when I couldn't connect with anybody. And I got every book I could get that he'd written. And the real gold mine came for me when I found a book called The Commonplace Book. That was his personal diary, and it
Mm.
had been published. And reading through his personal diary, I felt this just link between us. And so I would often talk to Morgan, because his family called him Morgan. I would often talk to Morgan when I was lonely or in pain or confused, and just be like, what do I do? And so that was my first real kind of like confidant or advocate, if you will. So I love that you included, it doesn't have to be somebody who's real. Um, but I'm very lucky to have amazing mentors. So Beth was on here earlier. I consider her a mentor. She's somebody I aspire to be like, someone I can
Mhm.
look up to. Janet Ivey, another one. Janet Ivey is like another mother to me. She is an actress and a spacer
Mm.
and a builder and an educator. And she's just done so much, but she always has time to sit with her friends and grab a coffee and say, what's going on? And let's talk. Loretta Whitesides,
Mm.
she has like changed my life. Space
Same.
Kind was so powerful. I loved my journey before Space Kind, but I found my home with Space Kind. I realized my spot in the space industry from her.
Yeah.
And she's just this larger than life person, but again, another person that she takes the time to talk to people and to mentor them and to guide and say, hey, we need to talk. I heard this thing and I don't think you're doing it right. Let's
Yeah.
chat. And so, I had one really powerful conversation. I had some conflict in a work environment. And my whole thing was like, I'll never work with that person again, and I'm just done. And she's like, well, what would it look like if you could still work with them?
Yeah.
And it was just that moment of like, but I don't want to be that open mind. Wait, okay.
You're like, wait a second.
Yeah, she has this powerful way of making you think about the possibilities that you didn't see.
Yeah.
And Mike Mungo is another one. Mike Mungo and I bonded over a landmark session, and he's just this playful, amazing guy. Again, like he's taken the time to like be like, Inara, I want you to start taking credit for the work you do. I'm surrounded by beautiful people like this, but they're all spacers and they get it. But sometimes you need someone who doesn't get it to pull you out of your bubble. So I had this mentor when I was younger. My hobby was archaeology.
Cool.
And here in Germany, we have Celtic and Roman artifacts falling out of the cornfield. So I've got hundreds of Roman coins and fibulas and pottery shards and Celtic rings. And
cool.
This guy, he's like 70 years old. He's never owned a computer. Doesn't have a smartphone. He when I talk about the work I do, he's like, "Oh, is that work you do on the computer?" He doesn't think it's real at all.
Yeah.
He thinks space is crazy. But we go out into the cornfields and we'll walk and we'll look for Roman coins, and it's like 7 hours, and maybe you'll find one if you're lucky.
Right.
But that whole time, it's like if I'm talking about space, or I'm talking about these big things I'm doing, or I'm in this big room with this big CEO, he's just like, "Oh, okay, on the computer, huh?" And he just like pulls me out of that world, and I have to just like leave it behind. Okay, so space isn't real and the industry doesn't work, and okay, none of that's valid right now. And then I can just peel back all of that and be me and just work on
and be there now.
Yeah, and just be the baseline of like flesh and blood human without any of those masks or shields or ideas or achievements, and just be like in the raw with him. And it grounds me.
That's beautiful. Amazing. Yes, we should all have, an elder and, someone that we can go spend time nature with and someone that helps ground us. But I love that. I love the variety you have there. And, a lot of those names are also very near and dear to my heart. So thank you for sharing. All right, we've got 2 minutes left. And my final question is a self-reflection question. And it's, imagine there's a extraterrestrial being that comes to Earth and you're the first human that they meet. So what do they learn about humanity because they meet you?
Ooh, that's a lot of responsibility.
I know.
So Anon represent the species.
What's top of mind?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to fall back on Sci-Fi for this one. There's this moment in Babylon 5 where each alien species is going to present their religion. And so each day you get to meet a different alien species religion. And they talk about their gods and everything. And then it comes to the humans, and they have like 400 people lined up, and they introduce all these different religions. And I think that's the thing I would want to present to aliens, is that we're a species, but we're this beautiful blend of everything you can possibly imagine. We have all these crazy, chaotic differences, and really what humanity is a dance. It's a dance of chaos, trying to make all those pieces fit together, but also be different. And so that's what I would say is, be gentle with us, handle us with care, because this is not a static image or a static block. This is this movement, living, dynamic, interflowing, chaotic kind of mess that's beautiful at the same time. So handle us with care as we go out into space.
I love that. And for all you aliens out there listening, I hope you take heed to this advice and are gentle with us when you finally come visit us, because that would be amazing. Inara, this has been so much fun. Thank you. I think we've shared a lot of knowledge and wisdom, and you certainly offered some really beautiful reframes and perspectives for both people inside space and out of space. So thank you so much for being here with me today. If people would like to connect with you, where should they reach out?
Galaxis Gal on all the things. I'm everywhere. You can find me as the Galaxis Gal. So you want to put that up on the screen. I'm on the LinkedIn and the Facebook and the Twitter and the Instagram and all the stuff. You can find me there. I'm always pretty receptive to talking to people. And, if you've got a space question or you want to chat about space, I'm there. Find me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Inara. We'll see you soon, hopefully in real life. But thank you again for spending your Sunday with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Sarah.
And thank you for everyone who joined in with us live today. As always, if you like this episode, please like and subscribe on YouTube. We're going to be back next week with Cheryl Vargas, who is an artist living in Chicago, and she's got pretty cool hair. It's short and white like mine, but we really connected on bridging the gap between leadership and art. So stay tuned. We'll be live next Thursday.
Peace out, spacers.